funny you said that. Actually, if you go to the bathroom during my story, I will not forgive you. So that was a good transition. I noticed a couple of people taking pictures too. I'll try to pose like in my most muscular pose. The strongest. So anyway, the story I'm going to tell, I'm not really using the prompt, but I'm going to go. So I spent 3 years as a newspaper reporter in Canandaigua. So I'm going to tell you guys a story about journalism. I'll tell you the thing about when you're a newspaper reporter, you have tons of good anecdotes that you can tell. So I'll try to tell 2 of them. Hopefully I won't run out of time. There's a chance I will. But the first one, since it's February, I figure I'd start off with kind of a love story, an interesting one. So I came into work. It was my first year working in the paper. Again, this is Canandaigua. It was in the summer. It was a hot day. One of our editors came in, and she's like, I think somewhere down I heard that people are calling in and saying that they see this guy walking around town with a mannequin. They're like, Scott, can you try to drive around and see if you can find this person? He was just walking around Canandaigua with a mannequin. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a great news story. That's journalism. So yes, I get in my car and drive around. I'm like, I'm never going to find this person. I didn't think it'd be anywhere. So I was obviously going down the main roads. I figured that would be my best bet. So I'm going down routes 5 and 20, and I'm like, no, I don't see this person. I think it'd stand out. So as I was driving back, like I'm kind of like jamming to music, air guitaring, steering wheel drum in my car. So like, wait a second, I see, it's pretty unmistakable when you see someone walking along the street with a mannequin. So I'm like, oh, that is him. So I pulled off to the side, there was a parking lot there. I was on 5 and 20, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Canandaigua. It was close to the Taco Bell, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's getting Taco Bell and mannequin has good taste. So I pulled over to the parking lot there. Walk up, I'm like, how am I going to approach this guy? I don't know. I mean, just walking with this giant man, and it wasn't like just a store mannequin. As I found out, it was actually just this giant, it was black, it was like 200 pounds, just this giant like tackling dummy pretty much. That was like the size of it. He's just dragging it around Canandaigua. So I started my conversation with him. I'm like, hi, how are you doing? And actually, I recognized the story a little. So it was actually in the, I think, Watertown. They did a story item, and then CNN did a story item, because not only was he walking around with this mannequin, he was walking around with his wife. He was married to the mannequin. So I don't know if any of you guys have seen Lars and the Real Girl. Anyone? Yeah. So it was pretty much the thought of that. This guy did not look like Ryan Gosling, sorry. He didn't look like Ryan Gosling at all. And so I'm talking with him, and I'm like, how am I going to write a story? Because you want to be fair to him. I don't want to write a story where I'm just like mocking this guy. And it already seems like I am. Like, he didn't look like Ryan Gosling. He was sunburned. It was the summer. He's just walking on. No sunscreen. You need sunscreen. He was missing a tooth. His hair was like all matted down. Like he hadn't showered in a while. So I start talking to him like, how are you doing? That's pretty much how I started it. And he's explaining about his wife, Mannequin, who has an elaborate backstory, by the way. Her first name, it looked like Tegan, but it wasn't Tegan, it was Tegan. It rhymes with Reagan. She's really specific about that. Her last name, I can't even pronounce it. He's like, oh, it's Icelandic and African. And it was just like this elaborate backstory, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like writing this all down. Took a few pictures. People are stopping on the side of the street to take pictures with this guy. And they're like, it's just this kind of, it's so strange. Like, who's seen anything like this? So I'm talking with him, and I'm like, I can't write this story. I'm just going to be making fun of this guy. But, as he was explaining, and he's like, well, I'm going to Dansville, which is a really long way from Canandaigua. That's not a long while. And he was coming from near Syracuse, so he's going across the state, just walking with this mannequin who is really happy. They go camping out. He's like, she sings songs. I have to get some of her favorite food. Not Taco Bell, I don't know. Should be Taco Bell. And so I'm talking to him, and he's like, you know what? I know people are making fun of me. Like, he seems self-aware. Like, obviously, you think there's either something wrong with this guy, or I don't know, or he just has, or there's something Harry Potter-like happened, and his wife is actually trapped. I kind of like that option, but so maybe there was just something wrong with him. But the thing that I noticed the most was he genuinely loved what he thought was his wife. He actually really loved it. He's like, I don't care what anyone thinks. I love my wife here. So I took that away, and that's kind of how I wrote the article. I'm like, it's kind of in a weird way, people are laughing, and he just doesn't care. It's like he knows his passion in life, he knows it, and he's just following that path, going to dance. So I haven't followed up, so I don't know what happened to him, if he made it or not. He didn't have a phone with him, so I don't know. Hopefully he made it. Hopefully no divorce. I knew divorce is tricky. Hopefully they're still together. So my next story is completely different from that, and I'm going. Do I have enough time for another one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Go on, time to it.
Going from romance here to murder. Or just a left turn. So this is a few years later, and there was this case. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it was a missing man in Salem. He was missing. It was really sad story. We didn't know. No one had known what happened. One of the reporters went to the wife's house. He joked, well, first of all, you have to understand, in newspaper business, a lot of people think maybe we're bad people. So you kind of have to, you deal with a lot of tragedy, a lot of sad stuff, so you get hardened to it. You kind of have a sense of humor that if someone just walks in a newsroom, they're probably like, wow, you guys are horrible people. We're not horrible people. But anyway, he joked around, he's like, I was looking around for holes or, freshly dug holes in the backyard, didn't find anything. So we always joke about that, and so that's during the summer. Then during December, I went home from work that day. I went over some of my good friends. They lived in the same apartment complex. We were eating dinner, had a nice glass of wine. I was ready to get drunk. I'm like, oh, this is going to be awesome. And I get a call from my editor, and I'm like, this isn't good. So you know what it is. You're getting called into work. There's no doubt about that. So I'm like, should I ignore it? And I'm like, I can't. So I answer it, and she tells me, so we had a guy, we of course have a scanner, like in every newsroom with scanners. That's a whole different story. I'll go there. But there's another guy who has like a special scanner, and he can get stuff that we couldn't hear on that. So he had it, and there was a police gathering at this missing man, the wife's house, which is again in Stanley, New York, which I don't know if you guys know where that is. That's out there some way. And I was in Canandaigua, so it wasn't as far. So she's like, police are gathering, and we don't know. Can you just drive out there and check it out? So I have my glass of wine, and I'm like, I don't want to. But I did. So I drove out there. It was December. It was really cold. This is where I learned always have the spare clothing in your car when you're a reporter, because it was so cold. I was shivering. It was awful. So I pull up, and no one else is there. So I walk up to the street, and there was like a bunch, no one the reporters or anything, but there was a bunch of sheriff's deputies there, and they're all huddled like around the house. There's police tape all around the house. I'm like, all right, something's going on. And I didn't want to like sneak up on them, but it was dark out, so I'm just kind of sidling up, and I think I just scared the shit out of them. There's the three deputies talking. I'm like, please don't pull a gun on me. Like, I'm like, hey guys. So again, I didn't know, what was going on here. So like, you have to get back immediately. They're like, you have to get back. So they took me back. They started a barrier. It was like a dead end, so there was a road, end of a road, and then it split off in two. So they were in that direction. They had me like half a mile down. And they're like, we can't tell you what's going on now, just hang tight. And again, it's really cold, so, I'm debating, I'm like, should I tweet this out? You tweet stuff, but if I'm tweeting it out, I'm like, there's a police presence, it's also tipping off other news organizations who will then come down there. So we talk, the photographer, I'm calling my editor, again, there's no cell service, we're out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, my photographer gets out there, so I'm not alone. So I actually have someone to talk to. And eventually my editor calls, and she's like, yeah, tweet this out. So I start doing it. And then, of course, all the TV stations. And I won't say anything bad about them, because I work for one now. So they eventually hear about it. They're again in Rochester, so that's a waste. And the police, so they only like to give one press conference, so they wait till everyone gets there. So I'm just waiting around, and it's funny. Me and my photographer, we're just talking to this deputy, and he's joking around, and he had a good sense of humor. And then I look over, there's like a bunch of cats. There was one cat. Like maybe another one, like in the shadows. I'm like, oh, there's a bunch of cats, and they kept like jumping out and scaring my photographer and me. And then this lady comes in and pulls in, so our headlights like light it up, and there's just this tree. There's like 30 cats, all just hanging around. I'm like, this is worse than whatever's happening down there. I love cats, but I thought a cat was gonna murder me that night. And then we'd have another story. So the deputy, he's there, and he again isn't telling us what's going on. We know it's something big. There's a lot of police. So finally, the sheriff comes, gives a press conference, and he's like, "This woman, she's in custody for her husband. He's dead. We're looking for remains." So I'm like, holy shit, this is huge. But there wasn't like any charges or anything yet. But we had a good story, so I'm tweeting that out, run back to the newsroom, and it's interesting because you don't understand, it's a horrible, horrible story that you're writing about, but when you're actually doing it, you get like an adrenaline rush, because you're like, oh my god, this is incredible, I'm breaking this story. So we got out, published that, and then the next morning, again, like all the TV stations were in court. We knew this woman was going to be in court. We didn't know what's going on, and no one thought to call the district attorney, so I'm like, I'm going to give him a call, see what's going on. So I give him a call, and he's like, yeah, she's charged with murder. She was eventually convicted too. She was found guilty. So I broke a murder story, which is pretty incredible in the business, but it was the strangest night. Like I said, it was so cold. There was cats everywhere. And I'm sparing you the details of really grisly murder. So. Maybe we go to the old town, I'll have a few drinks, and we can talk bloody murder. But yeah, it's just, when I think about being a journalist, it's just all these different stories. It's the weird characters you talk with, the weird cases you get up to. It's really like something where I love the profession, and it's really cool, and it gives me good anecdotes, and I like to share it with people. So that's my story.